This is Joe Kopsick. It's August 15th, 2018. And yesterday I called in to Sam Seder's show, Majority Report. It's a podcast. Sam Seder is, I guess, a kind of progressive leaning Democrat. And I just want to play this call. It's about 20 minutes long. I called yesterday morning or afternoon. And I'm just going to put a little bit of commentary over it for fair use and kind of expand and explain on the things that they kind of didn't let me get to. And here goes.
Let's go to a 608 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Joe. I'm calling from Illinois.
Hello, Joe.
I'm a libertarian.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm a libertarian. I just wanted to say I like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I like what they're saying. I think she's right on the, Palestine being occupied. I wish we could get back to the Libertarian Progressive Alliance where we work together against the wars for monetary reform and to end the war on drugs.
I just want to add to that a little bit. People who say Palestine is not a country, it does have less than completely full UN status, and I admit it is recognized by 23 less countries than Israel is, but Israel is not recognized by all countries in the world, just like Palestine. The Jews were a nation before they had a state, just like Palestine, just like the colonialists in America, just like Catalonia. All right. But here's the other thing. I wanted to say Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is part right on unemployment. They say the unemployment rate is 3.8%. But Trump said himself 3 years ago while running for office, he said in an interview, real unemployment is 42% if you include all of the 90 million people who are out of work, not all of whom have technically filed for government unemployment. People who are non-employed but not technically unemployed. I'll give you this, she was a little bit off message, but she was right to criticize the way, what she did in general was criticize the way we measure unemployment. And she was a little off target. There are better examples she could have used. People working long hours and multiple jobs is not at its highest rate ever, but that doesn't mean it doesn't still happen. I work security. I know people who work 60 hours a week. It does happen. So yeah, she's right on a few things. And again, Trump contradicted himself on unemployment. He wants to pretend it's 3.8%. Mitt Romney also acknowledged that real unemployment is much higher than the state unemployment rate. Look up U3 versus U6. Look on my blog earlier from this month, August 2018, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is part right on unemployment article. You can look up in there. Unemployment's a lot higher than we think it is, folks. Trump won't admit that because he wants to look like he's being successful.
I'm sorry, what's your name was Joe, was it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, Joe, there's nothing, there's no not working on those things, right? Like, I mean, I think people are working on those things. The problem is
he wants to pretend that people are working on those things, but Bernie Sanders watered down Ron Paul's audit the Fed bill. Bernie Sanders does not care about real monetary reform. I have supported him in the past just kind of as a compromise, which I'll probably get into later. But yeah, I mean, some people are working on them. Bernie Sanders seems to have given up on monetary reform, and he seems to have given up on wars, which I also mentioned. He voted in support of 12 wars, a lot of the same wars that the Clintons supported. So yeah, Bernie Sanders was never great. Ocasio-Cortez is better, and she doesn't have the baggage that comes with Bernie Sanders.
Is that, from my perspective, is that when you see politicians who identify as a libertarian, right, as opposed to, let's say, one who identifies as a progressive, they don't tend to really actually show up when it matters, right?
I just wanted to chime in here to repeat what I'm talking about is called the Progressive Libertarian Alliance. It was an alliance that started to noticeably form in 2007, 2008, when Ron Paul, Ralph Nader, Bernie Sanders, Dennis Kucinich got together to, fight the war on drugs, end wars overseas, unconstitutional wars, and have monetary reform.
Like Rand Paul's been a bit of a disappointment, hasn't he, in that regard? I mean, maybe in terms of, he continues to advocate for legalization of marijuana broadly speaking, I mean, he makes a big show of it, but then when it's time to take a vote, he doesn't even vote that way.
Yeah, I mean, Rand Paul is good for voting against, surveillance measures and things like that and the war on drugs, but, he could be a lot better on preventing U.S. intervention in Syria and Ukraine, which I've kind of heard him use, making excuses for. I want to make sure that doesn't happen. I think there's plenty of, libertarians in the Democratic Party like Russ Feingold, Alexandria, Ocasio-Cortez, to some extent, Bernie Sanders, Kucinich is out of the game.
Wait,
libertarian is not just something that Republicans can be. Democrats and socialists can be libertarians too. Other people I wanted to mention were Ron Wyden, Cynthia McKinney, very liberty-oriented, freedom-oriented people who are, have leftist economics. The Party for Socialism and Liberation, Gloria La Riva, they're fine people. They believe in both freedom and equality.
I don't think they're libertarians.
They're libertarians.
Right. Civil libertarian. Right. Yeah, no, I think that's true. What about voting for Kavanaugh? Where do you think Rand Paul's going to fall on that? I mean, that is.
Here's where it went off the rails. I admit I shouldn't have said anything about Brett Kavanaugh because I don't know much about him. This is my Aleppo moment. Kavanaugh, I've only known about this guy for a month. So, yeah, I should have just said, I don't know. What's your next question? But we went into this little detour, so I apologize for this.
I think in hope he'll vote against him. Andrew Napolitano says that Kavanaugh helped Hillary get off for the Vince Foster murders.
I have to explain that. A few days ago on Fox News, former Judge Andrew Napolitano, former Fox host of Freedom Watch, said, "You remember Vince Foster who killed himself in the White House? How did his body get from the White House to Fort Marcy Park? Who was the prosecutor in charge of figuring out how his body got there? Who was the prosecutor that exonerated Hillary and the thugs that moved his body? A young Brett Kavanaugh." That's what Andrew Napolitano said. And I'm about to tell them I didn't fact check that, but I repeated it nonetheless because that's what I heard. I don't know how you could fact check something like that because, oh, geez.
I don't know a whole lot about that, but he seems pretty entrenched in both party establishments.
Wait. Whoa.
You were sounding so reasonable.
Joe, now wait a second. Is this a serious phone call?
Yeah. I called you a few years ago when I was more right-wing libertarian, and, I just want, now that we have this fascist Republican enemies, we have people, the coalition against fascists was classical liberals, libertarians, communists, Democrats, socialists. Just bring it back together. Fight World War II, end it for real this time.
Okay.
Enough bickering about economics.
Right. Wait, can we get back to the part about Kavanaugh getting Hillary Clinton off of the Vince Foster murder? Is that what?
I honestly didn't check up on this, and I'm 31. I was, 7 when this happened.
Right.
But allegedly, Vince Foster was. I don't know. Somehow he's on the team.
No. Vince Foster was not allegedly anything. Okay, any more than you are allegedly a unicorn. Okay, so Vince Foster committed suicide.
Vince Foster committed suicide in the White House. Yeah, there's nothing suspicious about that. But go ahead, Sam.
You're talking about Kavanaugh, supposedly covered up for it. Yeah.
Again, I don't know much about that, but that's
right.
What Andrew Napolitano.
I can tell. Yeah.
Here's the thing I think is a little funny. I don't like Brett Kavanaugh. I don't want to see him on the Supreme Court. Sam Seder doesn't like Brett Kavanaugh, doesn't want to see him on the Supreme Court. I hate Kavanaugh a little bit more than he does. Is that the problem? Why can't you focus on where we agree? We both don't want to see him on the Supreme Court. Why do you have to care that I have different problems with him than you do? I'm sure a lot of the disagreements overlap. I don't know. Let's talk it out. I don't want to see the guy in the Supreme Court because I think he's in bed with Trump and Clinton, who, for all intents and purposes, are best friends. I can't see a hair of. They're two sides of the same coin.
Okay. Well, see, here's the problem. Here's the problem with our alliance, Joe. That my concern is I have you on, and you call in. We're simpatico about legalizing marijuana. We're simpatico about war in many respects. Maybe criminal justice reform, maybe one or two other things, surveillance state, etc. And then you say something that is, to my ears, completely bat crap crazy. And the problem is that, like, they go, oh, well, I heard that from that guy Joe, who Sam Seder is in an alliance with.
Yeah, you can do that if you want to legitimize guilt by association. And I just want to ask Sam, why are you still carrying water for Hillary Clinton? She can't hurt you anymore. At least I hope not. Even if she can, they just basically admitted the Democratic Party is a private corporation. They can do whatever the hell they want. And even if Bernie Sanders wins, they can take it away from him without any legal repercussions. I know people who voted for Bernie Sanders, staunch progressive, who admits that even he made a fool out of her. Progressives are feeling betrayed by Clinton and Sanders. I was voting for Sanders while I knew he was bad news and not perfect. Not that any politician is, but.
And see, that's the problem. That's why these alliances, like, I'm happy for you to work on that stuff, but I can't be in an alliance with you if Judge Napolitano says something about Kavanaugh when he was working in the Ken Starr investigation, covering up for Hillary Clinton, murdering Vince Foster.
Oh, you win. Okay. Well, let's say Vince Foster did kill himself. Well, that means that Hillary Clinton has never done anything wrong. We don't want to talk about, helping intimidate her husband's accusers into silence and, defending a guy who raped a 13-year-old girl back in the 70s and getting him off with 6 months of jail. And,
Then all of a sudden, like, I'm either endorsing that or I'm getting tarred with that, and I don't want to be associated with it. Now, the same thing happens with the economics, because your ideas about economics, I don't know, because we haven't had a chance to explore them yet, I think are a little bit wacky, to say the least. It's quite conceivable. I also think that your perspective on, like, property rights is pretty nuts too.
Well, can we ask why this caller is a libertarian? What basic core principles he's basing this belief on?
Well, I believe in voluntary exchange, perfect competition if possible, full market integration, and
now let's say you can't,
competition and cooperation.
That's not really like a human ethic or ideal, though, right?
Well, wait a second. So what is perfect? What happens if there isn't perfect competition?
Well, yeah, we have to make adjustments for that, but we have to make competition possible. I'm not saying competition should be exalted above other values, but I actually criticize other people in the Libertarian Party for saying the party should support capitalism instead of free markets, and some of us believe there's a difference. You might not.
Just got to jump in here about competition. 1 second here. What happened here?
He's basing this belief on?
Well, I believe in
basing this belief
on the Libertarian Party.
So it's about voluntary exchange, justly acquired property, earned income, not unearned income. You have to homestead a property, make it livable, make it possible to live there, make it sustainable, not let it fall into disrepair. And you have to not take so much land that it interferes with other people's ability to get the land that they need, at least access to it, not necessarily ownership, access to, land that they need to survive, because you take up space in order to survive. So it's part of the reason why rent is theft. But anyway, what you have to do to the adjustments you have to make if you can't achieve perfect competition is to, like I was saying, to allow competition to become possible. And when you use regulations and the monopoly of the state to prop up the monopoly of businesses and you let the government steal people's money and give it to their cronies in order to keep their businesses afloat, that's not free markets. That's not meritocratic earning of what people actually want to give you. That's coercion, theft, extortion, swindling, intimidation. Usually, it's fraud. That's not acceptable, and that is an NAP violation. It's a violation of the non-aggression principle. That's not okay. It is a soft form of violence.
For saying the party should support capitalism.
And the other thing is that Democrats support monopoly licensing system, and so they support. They're helping inadvertently, I think. They're helping establish monopoly firms that have all these government privileges already. They're enabling them to stay in business by drafting favorable professional licensing standards that favor existing firms and keep existing firms and the unions which compromise with them in existence in order to preserve jobs, no matter how bad or exploitative they are or how much the union gives in to what the management wants. So you need to, if you don't like big monopoly private corporations, then stop giving them monopoly privileges with taxpayer money. Stop creating those corporations with the Secretary of State's offices and extending them LLC statuses using taxpayer-funded resources. Stop giving them all their power in the first place, and then the power to order us to buy their products through the government as a tax, like we did with Obamacare. It's an absolute illusion that free markets are not possible, and we've given up trying if we don't let ordinary people compete against the monopolies of large multinationals. If someone's competing against you, then you are de facto not a monopoly anymore. They might not have any reasonable chance to effectively compete against you, but you need to let them in order for it to be possible. And to have these favorable professional regulations, liberals like Sam Seder, I worry, would be, they would, you get rid of those regulations, then anyone can become what? A skilled craftsman who's able to contribute to their community and have income? What do you, like, the IWW used to try to stop, there's this thing called the IBWA. It was trying to teach people job skills, and the IWW interfered with them and basically, helped knock them out of existence because they were cutting into the established union workers' competition. They were competing. They were competition against the unionized people in the workplace who already had skills, and they didn't want extra people with skills coming in because that lowers the average amount of pay that they get relative to what they were receiving before when skills were hoarded more. That is what you get when you compromise with Democrats and you get all these professional regulations.
Free markets, and some of us believe there's a difference. You might not. Chomsky said good things about Adam Smith. So as Alexandria, Ocasio-Cortez, it's possible to reconcile markets and socialism.
Chomsky is a libertarian socialist.
All right, wait a second. I don't care about the labels and stuff like that. So wait a second. So
I think it's really ridiculous. Sam Seder saying, I don't want to hear about labels. I don't want to hear about theory. And the woman there, like, that sounds like not a set of human values when I was describing the free market. Well, I'm sorry. If I show the slightest bit of emotion, then conservatives will say I'm appealing to emotion. So I'm trying to appeal to logic and reason and, the facts of economics and the law. Excuse me.
You want there to be competition without, but be a little more specific of what you're talking about in terms of these the distinction between capitalism and competition.
Well, I'm not really saying. I'm more trying to say it's a distinction between free markets and capitalism. We don't want. I criticize the rest of the party for being too pro-private property rights, and for saying that landlords can charge people inordinate amounts of rent. Their rights really should be spent in the community, whether it's being spent at stores or whether it's being spent on the government for things that we're taxed for. There's no need for rentiers, landlords to collect rent, economic rent from people, and that's a principle you can find under capitalist and socialist ideas. But if we have voluntary exchange and markets instead of just rampant, unhindered competition, then we can have fair markets and we can
The best markets are regulated by the people and the consumers. Competition is regulated by the consumers who make sure to become competitors against monopolies. But also, if you leave people to cooperate in order to destroy established monopolies, that also helps get rid of monopolies. So competition is not always bad. It's only bad when you compete to provide lower prices at the expense of the person who's laboring to make those products.
Transition into a cooperative market system.
So wait a second. So be more specific, like what you're talking about, as opposed to what it's not, because I'm a little bit confused. You want to control people's ability to charge rent, essentially rent, not specifically in terms of like, but you don't want people to have the ability to own more than they do, and then sort of more than they need, and then profit off of that. Is that what you're saying?
I'm basically saying rent is theft, and I'm against absentee private property ownership that someone besides the owner has to defend.
Essentially, and I think my vision of free markets is kind of compatible with socialism because, we would allow a lot of cooperative ownership instead of just focused on individuals trying to stockpile as much wealth that they can individually and use that to discriminate people and exclude them and deprive them. We want to have shared resources. We want to have it.
How would we enforce
like,
this? How would we enforce this system under your?
Well, the thing is, under libertarianism, you can't enforce anything because force is wrong. You have to rely on peaceful, convincing rhetoric to convince people that what you want is better than what they so far support.
So there would be no laws in support of what you're talking. Now, see, here's the thing, Joe, is that like
the law of nature cannot be repealed. If you strike someone, they will strike you back. No government has ever changed that. If you want to call, a person defending themselves with their fist, if you want to call that the law, I mean, it's Newton's law. Every reaction has an equal and opposite. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
Force anything because force is wrong. You have to rely on peaceful, convincing rhetoric to convince people that what you want is better than what they so far support.
So there would be no laws in support of what you're talking. Now, see, here's the thing, Joe, is that like, here's why I get so frustrated talking to libertarians, even when some of their ideas sound appealing to me, because that is fantastical. We're going to have, if you want to set something like that up, if you want that to happen, it's not going to happen by you going around and convincing all these people and hoping that they continue to do it, because immediately what will happen in that situation, without the proper statutory regulatory structure, is that somebody will come in and take advantage of that system.
As if no one will come in and take advantage of that statutory and regulatory structure. Someone does every 4 to 8 years. They're called Republicans.
Yeah, it's true. They could use their free speech to shout me down and use hate speech. But,
no, not hate speech. They'll just come in and, the whole system where it's like, where you aren't charging rent. People are going to charge rent. People are going to amass more. I'm not saying all of them are going to do it, but we're basically living in that situation now. We see what happens when you deregulate a little bit. You're talking about total deregulation.
I don't really see. I have no idea why he's calling what I'm supporting deregulation. At a later point, he says that the Nazis supported deregulation. I mean, I don't know how. Every time the cops walk into your business, you got to go Zeke Heil. I don't know how that's deregulation. That sounds like a bunch of overregulation.
And not everyone's starting from zero either.
Well, of course. I mean, people are going to enter into that situation with a lot more money, and guess what they're going to do with it? They're going to use that money to amass even more money. There's going to be
But you see, the problem is that we have a government that enables a monopoly on currency. And if you let people coin their own currency, if you let localities or states or, businesses or whatever, ordinary people, if you let people coin money, if we had gold and silver, for example, I'm not saying we should just have only those things, but if people could mint their own currency at home without fear that they'd be put in jail for it, then you could have a diversity, you could have all different kinds of currencies and they would be free floating. They would compete against each other. The best one would win. You wouldn't have the law to make it into a monopoly where the people with the most USD are the best treated in society.
A competitive advantage. I'm going to have to ask Judge Kavanaugh if he killed Vince Foster as part of a lesbian phone sex ring with Hillary Clinton. That's something I'm super concerned about. But I mean, I met with him and he said that he didn't do it. So it's cool. I'll vote for him. I like that, nutcase Rand Paul. Right. Just I'm going to need to know if Trump was involved with the detonation of Building 7 by the CIA. Oh, he said he wasn't. I support him.
I'm going to make it clear, I have never voted for Rand Paul. I have resolved never to, and I had no point in this phone call. So I did not tell anyone to vote for Rand Paul.
You see the problem there, right, Joe?
Yeah, like you said, if I'm going to say crazy things, you can't be in an alliance with me. But if you can't look past the crazy thing I say every once in a while and focus on what we agree on, then I can't be in alliance with you.
Just got to jump in here. It is not supposed to be the government's job to protect people from themselves, people who are stupid enough to rent an apartment. People only do that out of desperation. And if the government wanted to do something to help people afford housing, it would stop occupying so much land out west. If the government occupied less land, then there would be more land that could be bought and sold, and hence land and housing prices would plummet. So if you want to do something to help people afford houses, you shouldn't be subsidizing flood-prone areas to have home insurance where people just get their house destroyed by a flood and the government's got to rebuild it with taxpayer money. No, that's a scam.
But no, wait a second.
But here's the thing. We have to convince people that charging rent is wrong, and we have to find alternatives to renting. That's the only way it's going to work. Or else we have to declare rent to be a crime. But then you have to kind of describe people who are renting units as accomplices to crime, and that's not always the case. So rent is sometimes theft. And housing could be much cheaper under a market system or under a quasi-socialist system. If it supports the market, if it monopolizes everything and commands people to buy a house and mandates certain minimum standards, especially if they're excessive, then it's going to make housing unnecessarily expensive, especially if you build it out of wood, which is flammable, which is the whole reason we have the fire insurance industry, which does not need to exist in residential. Just build houses out of glass and steel and stone, and they won't catch on fire.
Now, Joe, I'm not. All right, that's fine. We can't be in alliance with each other. But I'm just talking about your idea for setting up this, I guess, society where everybody volunteers, where you get 300 million people all on the same page. And they all agree to function in the same way without any type of regulatory or statutory guidelines or enforcement. You're not talking about politics. Honestly, you're just...
Yeah, I'm talking about a radical change in society that has to happen independent of politics, the kind Emma Goldman would have wanted. You can have private arbitration, private dispute resolution. It doesn't have to be for profit, but it can be outside of the state. Sharia law, for example, people resolve their disputes outside of the state all the time. Crazy conservatives call it Sharia law infesting the United States. These people are just going to private, non-state, non-binding.
Joe, there is force in the context of Sharia law.
You see what he did there? He just said, how are people going to come to agreements without some way to enforce it? And then I say, oh, well, there, you can voluntarily agree to have it enforced upon you. He's like, that's force. I'm like, you just told me that you wanted some force to agree. And, here's the other thing. Who would sign a contract that they don't think they could, hold up their end of the bargain to? If we had a voluntary society, we wouldn't have a bunch of unenforceable bullshit contracts that no one can live up to. It wouldn't be hard to enforce. You wouldn't need the state. Everyone would do their part to help enforce it by not letting it come to force, by doing their duty, doing the things they agreed to do and sign their name to.
In the context of American law, and you just admitted that you can't enforce a law against rent without using force against it.
Right.
So if you want to prove me wrong and implement socialism through force, go ahead. I'm going to try to do it voluntarily by convincing people, and I think you are going to as well, because you have a radio show, and that's what you do.
Well,
See, as much as I criticize Hans Hermann Hoppe, his argumentation ethics, which Stefan Molyneux has expanded on, is correct. The first person who calls for the use of violence in a debate loses the debate, because they're sending the message that if you disagree with me, I will put you in jail. And that's what Sam Seder has done to me in this debate. And I'm saying I can't excuse the political violence against you.
Yes, I understand, but I'm also saying that one of the things that we're going to have to do if we're going to...
And so what I'm trying to say here is he has given up. If he's resorting to force, he has given up trying to convince people that what he wants is appropriate. And that is the death of freedom. That's the death of civilization. That's the death of free speech. When you use violence instead of convincing rhetoric to convince people to destroy an industry like rent or fire insurance, instead of finding alternatives to it. Alternatives, choices, competition in markets, choices.
have more socialistic policies, or any policies, whatever they are, they're going to have to be codified in law, and they're going to have to be a function of statute and regulation, and then they're going to have to be enforced by the state.
Or communities, decentralized network of participatory democracies.
Yeah.
Is that really that different from how the United States started? I'm going to remind you, Lenin was not uninfluenced by the colonialists, and the founders of the United States who, agreed that some measure of democracy and republicanism and federalism should all play a part in it, just to different degrees. Anarchists and the founders and Leninists just had slight disagreements as far as I'm concerned. They all have different aspects of those systems. Some are more decentralized than others. Some care more about, the code of law, the rule of law. Some care more about protecting majorities and democracy. They're all basically the same thing, though. The USSR was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. What do you got? A republic that's got democratic aspects in it, but a socialist intention. And it's run by councils that are, elected. We have democratic elections in Republican systems right now. It's a democratic republic, and it's federated, which means that there's a balance between the central and the local governments. USSR had aspects of that. Anarchism would have a ton of that.
I agree with that.
May I just say two quick things to the gentleman? I guess, number one, as far as working together on things, like, we can. Maybe we'll end up being at the same protest about abuse of immigrants, as an example. Maybe you'll even vote in the same way to get Trump out of office, so that's fine. But we are obviously not going to be out.
For Bernie.
So there you go. So we already were working together. We're obviously not on the same page. And I
just wanted to say I voted for Bernie Sanders in the 2016 Democratic primary because he had a chance against Hillary Clinton, and it would have been better to have Bernie Sanders than Hillary Clinton. And I say that as a libertarian. I think there's a lot of progressives who agree, all of them, of course, and a lot of Republicans would agree too. Some Trump people were saying Bernie Sanders is good on trade, and he's good at not being Hillary Clinton. So, Trump won my state by 50%. He beat Ted Cruz by like 50. A lot of people could have afforded to, let Trump win by 40%. I'm going to vote for Bernie, try to swing this for Bernie against Hillary so that Bernie can win the primary and we can have a real debate between Sanders and Trump.
In terms of a lot of the substance, and I think, unfortunately, I don't know if Sam would say this, so I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think for me, one of the reasons I can't be in a full alliance with libertarians is because I think, and obviously not intentionally, that the economic policy, in your case, but the economic policies that you guys advocate are part of the road to the fascist threat that we're in right now. The deregulation, the allowing of sort of uninhibited corporate power. And I don't think think it's a surprise that a lot of libertarians did in fact support Trump, and I don't, so
It's not that a lot of libertarians support Trump. It's that a lot of Trump supporters claim to be libertarians just because, I mean, as soon as your guy gets in charge and, that he's dropping bombs in Afghanistan and, silencing his critics in the media and having his people beat up and these Hitler-esque tactics, this has nothing to do with libertarianism. His policy on immigration, it's anti-free market, it's anti-free travel. His policy on tariffs, it's anti-free trade. It's supporting the politicization of trade. It's making trade wars and cold wars and hot wars more likely. It's absolutely insane. It's got nothing to do with freedom. He only looked like a libertarian because he wasn't in power. Now that he's in power, he's a damn Nazi fascist bastard.
There's a substantive concern here other than people just not being able to put aside. I'm willing to put aside all sorts of relatively small differences to get things done, but we've got
like how much we hate Brett Kavanaugh. It's such a big difference.
Got some pretty big fundamentals, at least in the road to your utopia. Your utopia sounds nice, but
yeah, I'm really putting a lot of there's a lot of fundamental, there's a lot of blocks in the road. I'm just explaining perfectly how if these Democrats just become a little bit more radical and principled and support anarchism instead of carrying water for Hillary Clinton and compromising with the capitalists all day, maybe we could have some real liberty, have a united coalition against these fascists, and stop bickering over stupid crap like conspiracy theories.
It's a utopia, and what you might advocate economically to get there would make things far worse. If that makes sense.
This guy does not know what I advocate economically. Like I said before, Nazis are not libertarians. We may have been a isolationist in World War II, but the party didn't exist back then. And we wanted to make sure if the war was fought, that it was fought responsibly, constitutionally, and well funded, and that we could fight it, win it quickly, and get out.
Yeah, and I have criticized libertarians for the thing that you just criticized, which is they advocate too much corporate power. They don't recognize often enough that corporations are actually creations of the state. The Secretary of State's office creates those things. LLC statuses, confers financial and legal immunity for them.
So yeah, Democrats, if you don't like corporations, then maybe the government that you love so much should stop creating them with all of our money that it has to steal first.
And that's not free market, in my opinion.
Corporations would not exist in a free market.
I don't know about the rest of the LP,
but here's the thing: is that there's, and I don't want to. I feel like I'm telling you there's no Santa Claus. There is no free market.
There's no free market because of people like Sam Seder who don't believe that there can be. Noam Chomsky basically admitted that it's possible when he praised Adam Smith in an interview.
It doesn't exist. It can't exist. It can't.
Look up the first three fundamental theorems of welfare economics and tell me that again.
The first fundamental theorem of welfare economics and the second fundamental theorem of welfare economics. They explain how free entry into markets and into competition is what allows the equilibrium of markets. It's what allows supply and demand to meet. It's what allows markets to clear. It's what allows prices to be found on a sporadic, let's call it a Cadillac-y kind of free-floating, spontaneous order of the market.
Look up co-opetition. Computers,
Send me your link.
and cooperatives working together.
Listen, you can tell me about theories, okay?
Whatever theories, these are solid economic principles that have been tested. I'm saying things from classical economics. This is not a matter of debate. It's not a theory.
But I'm telling you, it can't exist. It can't.
That's what they said. That's what they said about a world without slavery, a world without war, a world without peace. So give up if you want.
Well, first of all, I got news for you. We have a world with slavery. We have a world with war. And I don't know if we can have a world without those things. I hope we can. I certainly want to work towards them. And like Michael said, every step we take towards that goal is a net positive. Every step that.
So then logically, every step we take towards free markets, ones that are actually free where people aren't forced to buy things, then that would be a net positive, wouldn't it?
We take towards the goal that you're talking about, not only is it impossible for us to get there, is a net negative, in my mind.
As opposed to just his idea where you submit to the government and all the regulations, even if your worst enemy is in charge of that government.
Every bit of deregulation that we would have to impose to get there is going to be problematic. Every bit.
I hope you like the level of regulation you're getting under President Trump, because that's what you're going to get every 4 to 8 years until you change the system and actually protect individual rights.
Well,
you see, these Democrats are just growing the government. One more program every year, more programs, more workers, and then some governor or president or Supreme Court order can come by and just knock that shit over. Years of progress, years of public attention, years of money, tons of people's jobs. Why don't you protect unions by depoliticizing their jobs? Let them work in the private sector. Figure out private sector ways to provide things traditionally provided by the government so that Republicans can't come in and destroy all these programs just because they feel like it. Why don't you destroy the ring so that no one can use it for evil?
I'm not full-on libertarian socialist. I'm a non-dogmatic Marxist, but I do lean that way because I have seen how badly things can go when socialism leans towards bureaucracy and authoritarianism. It's been tried many times and always went horribly awry. So I keep hearing you cite Chomsky and Emma Goldman, and it's not just a label thing, like whatever you want to call it. Those people did not and do not or do not want to let poor people starve in the streets, right? And you keep talking about voluntary associations, but whatever you want to call them, leftists, left libertarians, anarchists, whatever, we recognize, and socialists, all kinds of socialists as well, we recognize that there are more entities than the government that are making people unfree.
I just want to add here, I'm not going to pretend that all associations that exist right now are voluntary. When I say we need voluntary associations, I mean we need voluntary associations. We need associations that are not affiliated with or intervened in by the state.
Right. So
I would never pretend that all current existing contracts or property agreements are legitimate just because they're enforced or just because they're claimed.
So when you say it's about voluntary associations, if your choice is between working for a company at the wage that they're offering and starving to death, what kind of a choice is that?
You're absolutely right. That's not enough choices. And I tell other libertarians that there's private discrimination that still happens all the time. And if government doesn't actively enable it now, it used to enable it, enabled it recently. And those actions, the result of that continues on to today.
And I'm talking about things like, the black codes, Jim Crow laws, redlining. In Oregon, there was literally a no blacks allowed policy that allowed the government to whip black people who refused to leave the state. And that wasn't even repealed until like 10 or 20 years ago. These policies are still affecting people.
And a lot of them don't admit to that.
And sometimes they were the government's fault. That's all I'm saying. They weren't always the government's fault. Sometimes they're the government's fault. Sometimes they're the government and the private business's fault, like the Jim Crow laws, where the private businesses lobbied for those laws so they could have an excuse to legally discriminate against people that they really had no reason to justify discriminating against.
One of the first things I realized libertarians could be wrong on is, affirmative action. And we don't want people to starve in the streets. I try to tell people in the Libertarian Party, it's not just cops and military that should be, that's the bare minimum function of a society. You have to have, at least food stamps or something. But if we don't, there are alternatives to this, though, like food not bombs, mutual aid. There's ways for people to feed each other without the government.
Churches, charities, nonprofits. There's plenty of ways to get food. You can grow it yourself. I mean,
but that said,
if the government lets you, if they don't charge you $1 million for a permit to grow food on your own property.
Wouldn't have food stamps be the first thing I would abolish if I were trying to dismantle the government one piece by one. Rand Paul said he wouldn't cut a dime from the social safety net unless he first got rid of the entire corporate welfare safety net. So
it sounds like.
So Sam's co-host Michael said that Rand Paul lied when he said he wouldn't cut one dime from the social safety net until all corporate welfare is eliminated. Yeah, he lied. You know, I understand that Rand Paul has to work with who he needs to work with. You know, it's good that Trump's listening to him on a few things. I don't think Rand Paul's perfect. Trump's far from perfect, but Rand Paul does have some good things to say. And here's the thing. Rand Paul is not in charge of the government. How come every time a libertarian opens his mouth, the Democrats got to pretend he's been in charge of the government for 80 years? We slightly influenced FDR. I mean, excuse me. What did I say there? The libertarians arguably slightly influenced Reagan, is what I meant to say. But George Bush Sr. destroyed all the gains of that. And, you know, Reagan raised taxes. You know, there's all that corruption in his administration. There were so many wars in Latin America. The guy was not a libertarian. Libertarians are not responsible for the current mess the government is in. You know who's been in charge? Who's responsible? The Democrats and Republicans. And the Democrats keep enabling a system in which Republicans can be in charge half of the time, which ruins half our lives.
It sounds like you are leaning more to the left than we initially thought when you said you were a libertarian, and I would encourage you to read more Chomsky and more Emma Goldman. And
I think she should be encouraging Sam Seder and his co-host Michael to read more left-wing literature, because a few of these things, I'm telling them to be more radical. Like, they're like, hey, Sharia law, and it ends in force. And I'm like, yeah, American law does too. Any law, like, you're the one who's telling me we need force. But then, so like, you support literal terrorism with politically motivated violence and force. And then I give it to you and you're like, oh, no. You're basically calling me, like, it's almost as if they're calling me a Marxist for, you know, they're giving into Islamophobic fear-mongering about Sharia law. It's a form of private arbitration, and there's non-religious private arbitration that goes on in America all the time, licensed and licensed by the government, and also any ordinary person who can be a neutral, mutually trusted arbiter of a dispute. Any person, they don't have to have a law license. It can just be someone who's trusted by two people who have a dispute. It could be your friend, you know, a mutual friend. If they don't have a vested interest in resolving that dispute, if they don't have a vested interest in the outcome, you know, it's like a judge. Then they don't need to recuse themselves. They are qualified to arbitrate that dispute because they don't have a vested interest. They're truly independent. That's how you have dispute resolution outside of the state. Any asshole can see, you know, who's right in a situation if they're trusted and mutually chosen by the two or more parties to the dispute. That's how you get the state to avoid wasting resources to butt into people's private disputes that have nothing to do with the government.
I would love to pull you further in this direction, because
I'm actively trying to be pulled in that direction. Thank you, ma'am.
There is a huge, huge difference between building a free society built on respect for humanity and the brotherhood of all human beings and true freedom, and the sort of free market hell world that right libertarians would create if they were in charge.
A hell world in which, we have so much deregulation that you're allowed to stop the racist cops from coming onto your property. That sounds pretty hellish.
Joe, call back in a couple more years, and I think we'll be a little bit closer.
But I would love to hear from you again, like, seriously. And
Thank you.
I wish you well on your political journey.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks
For the call. He has assured me that there was not a sex colony with children on Mars, and I'll be voting to confirm.
And there's the co-host Michael with the joke about, if Brett Kavanaugh can just confirm that he's not a conspiracy theorist, almost as if to say, like Joe Kopsik is. If he can assure me he's not a conspiracy theorist, I'll vote that damn Republican straight into the Supreme Court. I was like, oh, that's real funny. I thought you didn't like the guy. Maybe you should stop carrying water for the capitalist Republicans who are trying to make you think that your welfare state is dependent on corporations, which they want you to think is the sole producer of wealth instead of land and labor.